you all for joining. We're just gonna wait a couple more minutes for people to roll in, and then we will pass it to Michelle to get us started. All right, I think we have a good group with us and people are rolling in. So, Michelle, I will pass it to you for a brief welcome and overview of the agenda, and we can get this content started.
Sounds great. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for those of you who are in snowy locations for making this possible. As Madeline said, I'm Michelle Asher Cooper, the Vice President for Public Policy at Lumina. And on behalf of Lumina State Policy Team, welcome to this webinar on setting value-centric attainment goals. My team and I, along with our partners from HCM, are truly grateful to have some of your time today. But we're grateful to have your partnership always, and your leadership in advancing post-secondary in your states is just remarkable. So thank you all the way around. As you all certainly know, the attainment landscape continues to evolve. And in this very moment, our work is just can't be about counting credentials. It has to be about people and improving their lives and responding to the workforce needs and strengthening their communities. And certainly, I know that's what you all focus on in your work daily, but I just want to call that out that that is certainly how we approach this at Lumina as well. We are looking to make sure we are changing people's lives, their circumstances, and the communities that we hope that they can thrive in. We want to make sure that when learners enter into higher education or a workforce training program, that they leave better than they entered. We want them to leave with credentials that truly matter. And ultimately, I believe that it's our shared responsibility to do that and to make sure that our post-secondary system is delivering value for the learner, for their family, for their communities, and also for employers that matter a lot in our communities. And certainly these are the types of conversations that we'll be having with you all throughout our time in the State Attainment Collaborative, and certainly the type of things we're going to hopefully talk about today. So first, we're going to talk about Goal 2040, the why behind it. And so things like the framing, the elements, how to define value, all of those things will be a part of the conversation. We will talk at a high level, but we'll also talk about some nitty-gritty details as well. And we're going to reserve some time for discussion. So we look forward to your questions and your engagement during that time. So with that said, I am really delighted to have my colleague Courtney Brown, who is Lumina's Vice President for Impact and Planning with us. And also we have Chris Mullen. Chris is our Strategy Director for Data and Measurement. And they are going to kick off this conversation talking a little bit about Goal 2040. Thank you, Courtney and Chris, for being here. But thank you, everyone, like I said, for being here. I'm really excited to have you all here today, and I'm eager to share and learn throughout this process right alongside with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate it. And I'm so delighted to be with all of you this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. So you can go to the next slide. So what I thought I would do is just go back a little bit for those of you who've been in this work for a minute. So when Lumina began this work, really in the early 2000s, the national conversation was almost entirely on access. People were asking, how do we get more people into college? And that was absolutely important and continues to be important. Access matters. But over time, we realized something fundamental. Getting students through the door was not enough. Too many people were starting and not finishing. So the conversation really evolved from access to success. How do we help more students complete? But even that was incomplete. Success at that time was really mostly focused on students who'd already enrolled. It still centered on those fortunate enough to begin. And we had to think about, like, what about all those million of working adults who never started? What about the entire communities left out of the system altogether? And the realization led to a much bigger shift. So in 2008, Lumina set a goal for the nation, what we call Goal 2025. And that was 60% of working age adults would hold a quality degree, certificate, or industry recognized certification by 2025. And really, in setting Goal 2025, for the first time, the focus was not just on enrollment or on completion within institutions. It was on attainment within the entire population. And I would say this changed the conversation. It changed the national conversation. When Lumina set that goal for the nation in 2008, only one state had an aligned attainment goal, just one. And over the next 15 years, 48 more states adopted their own attainment goals. All of your states here. And states began to see this not just as an education issue alone, but as a talent and an economic strategy. Increasing attainment meant increasing the skills of their entire workforce. And the progress has been remarkable, as I'm sure many of you have seen when you go visit Stronger Nation site, or I encourage you to go visit Stronger Nation site soon after this. Just Google Stronger Nation and Lumina Foundation, and you'll find it if you haven't seen it. But the progress was pretty amazing. So in 2008, about 38% of adults 25 to 64 had a degree. Today, that number stands at about 55%. That's a 16 percentage point increase nationwide. Every single state saw amazing growth. Millions of adults earned credentials, and many secured promotions, pay raises, opportunities in new fields. So to me, that is amazing progress. And the nation wouldn't be there without the work of every single state on this call today. But alongside that progress, something else was happening. We also saw trust and confidence in higher education eroding. We partner with Gallup, and according to the Lumina Gallup public confidence survey that we've done for the last few years with them, public confidence in higher education dropped sharply over the last decade. So about 10 years ago, over 60% of Americans had a great deal of confidence in higher education. By last summer, by 2025, that figure had fallen to just over a third. So just a third of people in the United States had a great deal of confidence. And worse, about a third had no confidence at all. People were questioning cost, they were questioning whether programs are aligned with the labor market, and they were asking whether a credential will actually lead to a good job and a good pay. And those concerns matter. Because we've never thought that a credential should just be a piece of paper. It's supposed to be a gateway to opportunity. It's supposed to open doors to economic mobility, a better life, improve conditions in all of your states. So we listened to what the nation was saying. You know, we were starting this listening tour in 2024 as we were coming up to the end of the 2025 goal. We spoke to many people in your states, including some of the people I see that are on this call today. And based on those conversations and what we are learning from all of you and the public, we realized that attainment alone was no longer enough. So just how, in the early 2000s, we had to move from access to completion and then from completion to attainment, we realized we needed to move beyond attainment. And that's why we have a new goal, 2040. Oh, thank you, Madeline. Goal 2040 really builds on the progress of Goal 2025, but it raises the bar. So by 2040, as you can see here, and as I'm sure all of you know, 75% of adults in the US labor force will have college degrees or credentials of value that lead to economic prosperity. And there are a few key differences here. So first, the emphasis is on value. It is not enough to simply count credentials any longer. They have to lead to tangible outcomes. Under Goal 2040, a credential of value is one that leads to earnings at least 15% above those with someone with only a high school diploma. That anchors our work directly to economic prosperity. Second, the framework also allows us to look more clearly at who's being left behind. We see that attainment's risen overall, but it's not been even. And by focusing on values or the value-centered attainment, we can identify gaps across regions, industries, and populations, and we can see where access barriers persist. We can also see where completion is lagging, and more importantly, we can see which credentials are not producing strong outcomes. And that clarity helps us make better decisions, helps states make better decisions, helps policies make better decisions, and it helps prioritize connecting all of this to well-paying jobs. It encourages institutions to perhaps strengthen career-connected learning. It pushes alignment between education systems and labor markets, and it invites collaboration across sectors so that economic opportunity and education opportunity reinforce one another. And third, this goal requires broader cross-sector engagement. Just as with attainment, higher education cannot do this alone. States need job opportunities that are well-paying. Institutions have got to re-engage underserved populations. Employers have to partner in career-connected learning. Policymakers have to streamline transfer, remove barriers for adult learners, align funding and quality assurance, and a host of other things that you're all already thinking about. So I would say for those of you who have been familiar with Goal 2025, Goal 2040 is both a continuation and really a course correction. We're continuing with the belief that national prosperity depends on the skills of our workforce. Expanding high quality education and training after high school, we believe, is essential for economic competitiveness and individual opportunity. And it also corrects for what we've learned. We've learned access alone wasn't enough. We learned success alone wasn't enough. And we've learned now attainment alone is not enough if it does not translate into real economic value. So this next chapter, this next goal is about value-centered attainment, ensuring that when people invest their time, their energy, and often their money into education and training, it really pays off for them, for their families, for their communities, for your states. And the really good news is, again, looking at Stronger Nation, again, I encourage you to do that. You can see what's possible. So, as I started in just over a decade, you collectively helped move the nation 16 percentage points forward. That's extraordinary. And now the question is, how do we build on that momentum? How do we restore confidence? And now work toward this goal to ensure 75% of our workforce holds credentials that genuinely lead to prosperity. That's what Goal 2040 is about. If you go back to that next slide, Madeline. And as I mentioned, we're starting with wage and income because it's data we have. It's data that we have at the national level and the state level. We're using a 15% over high school degree alone, and we're comparing that to the national at Lumina because we're a national foundation. We have a national goal. So we're using that national comparison. Chris now is going to talk a little more nitty gritty and about what's possible also at your state level, because we have all these data by your state also, but he can talk a little bit more in more detail about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. It's great to be with you and so many familiar faces and friends from across the country. And whether we've worked on Stronger Nation or DevEd reform or anything together, it's great to see so many of you and meet so many new friends. I'll just get the next slide, please, Madeline. To pick up on, Courtney outlined kind of the top line decisions that were made about the 15% wage threshold, the American Community Survey, and how it works. I'm going to spend a couple minutes just getting a little bit deeper into the data, but not too deep. We'll have a follow-up webinar where you can get as far in the weeds as we want to about data, but I just want to reorient to some of the data sources we have available and some ways that we use that data. On this slide, you kind of see Stronger Nation, really in two different parts. If you look at the website itself, there's what we call the purple section, which is credentials of value at the very top, and then there's the orange section, which is educational attainment, which is our goal 2025. And also at the top right, there's a whole section for a methodology, which really we included FAQs and engaged the field to really say what questions need to be answered. If there's a question that's not being answered on that FAQ, send it to me. We'll answer it and put it up there for the public. But one of the first questions we had was, what's the difference in terms of who you're talking about for the population between educational attainment and credentials of value? And on this slide, you'll see in the orange box, when we thought about educational attainment for your state, we thought about the entire population with a post-high school credential in your entire state, right? Of working age, 25 to 64. I recently gave this talk and somebody said, well, what 25 to 64? How did you get to that age group comparison? And part of it is, if you remember when Goal 2025 was set a long time ago, and it's still true, is it's about economic competitiveness for the nation. And that age group aligns to the OECD education at a glance, where we're allowed to look at ourselves compared to other countries in the world. And so that age range was purposeful. If you remember, we did some disaggregations I'll get to in a second for that age group. So if you think about educational attainment as a extra large pizza, right? When you think about credentials of value, think more of a medium-sized pizza. And what I mean by that, I mean the population gets a little bit smaller. It's still the population for your entire state, but it's a population who's in the labor force, and ACS defines that as people working, looking for work, or in the military, and have a credential, and make 15% more than the national median for a high school graduate, right? So that necessarily excludes some people who might be in the attainment category and brings it down just a little bit closer. The reason why we did that is because we need basically people in a labor force, through your labor force participation, to have people with earnings to compare, right? We don't want to compare people with earnings and have the median put on be people who don't have earnings. And so next slide, please. And so how do we do this? For degrees, it's really clear and simple. The American Community Survey is our source, right? If you look at I'll start at the bottom. For degrees, it gives us all the data and information you need, we need, and others need to really understand educational attainment and credentials of value in your state. As you're, well aware, certifications and certificates are more challenging. There have been great advancements in the field by so many who have been working on this issue for a long time, where we get certification data from the current population survey, and we've been able to do that since 2018. That's also available by state. And in the past, we've had to kind of deduplicate the data between certificates and certifications because of our source for certificates. This year, we switched it out and we picked up a new survey called the N2s, and the National Training Education and Workforce Survey, which you see on the left column, credentials of value column at the bottom, which is a new survey which builds upon all of the work that's been done for over a decade to add new data to the federal data sets. That means we don't have to do the math to deduplicate between certificates and certifications. Our certification data can just be clean and available in the current population survey, annual social and economic component. However, we still need to do some estimates to get at a national number of certificates. We have a document, 14 pages long, that goes step by step of how to calculate that. So if you have not received it already or are interested in it, happy to send that to you. And that'll be part of our next webinar. Credentials of value, because we know it's an earnings data and the earnings change over time, we broke out age groups not into just 25 to 34 and 25 to 64, but we did 25 to 64 and 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, and 55 to 64, because we understand that earnings change over one's lifetime. The time scope right now for credentials of value is just 2023 and 2024. And we're not yet able to get county and metro area data, but it's something we're looking into. At present, we can only do national and state, whereas we could add county and metro data for educational attainment. So what does this look like for a state? Next slide, please. I picked my friends from Arkansas because you're first alphabetically. Please be upset that we picked Arkansas over a different state. But when you look at Arkansas, here's the landing page for your state. You can see in the upper right in the purple bar, where you can pick a 2024 report for. You can pick your state. You can pick any other state. There are ways on the tool to compare your state to other states and sort. And as Courtney said, I encourage you to explore more about it. But we have the data for your state presented clearly here. And you can see this is Arkansas's overall share. You see the purple bar at the top, which is underneath that is it kind of gives a list of the different types of data available. Introduction, summary, state credentials of value. We get into also education types, and that's types of credentials. We provide more information for your state by different credential types, different demographics that might matter to you, and detailed race ethnicity breakouts. All the data is shareable and linkable, and I also have the data, raw data for you if you like it. Next slide, please. But what's really exciting is things you can do with the data you might not have known. If you recall, in your state, and I don't know how many were involved in the goal setting for your state last time or have been a part of that process, but sometimes states, narrowed their age range or did something to make the estimate really important to their state. And this is one example. In the demographics tab, you can see we have your rate and we have it broken out by age group, for example. We can also do gender or race ethnicity. You can change the year. And so it can give you a really good understanding of where you are, which populations are in which space, and which ones you might want to focus on. And so we've analyzed and put the tools together for you to use, for us to look at, and for the nation to know about. And just encourage you as you start to think about your work to use the tool to help inform directions that you might go. And with that, I'll pass it back to Madeline.
Actually, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So thank you, Chris, Courtney, and Michelle, for getting us started. And with that important framing of Goal 2040, we're now going to spend a little bit of time trying to dive into how this can inform your efforts as part of the State Attainment Collaborative to set your own value-centered attainment goals as that North Star, and how that can be used to drive a comprehensive policy discussions that create the opportunities, as Michelle noted, for people to thrive. So it's already been kind of discussed, but just kind of to recalibrate here, right? Attainment is that broad measure referring to the educational levels reached by specific populations. So it includes individuals that receive credentials from post-secondary institutions in the state, as well as the number of people that moved into the state with a credential. So it captures that in-migration component. And as we just heard from Courtney and Chris specifically, right, Goal 2040 kind of builds upon that broad attainment measure or broad attainment only measure by adding this important and critical value lens. And specifically Goal 2040, right, is that 75% of adults in the labor force will have a post-secondary credential and earn 15% more than the median wage for high school graduates. So as Chris and Courtney alluded to, right, this is important in the sense that right, it recognizes that attainment is beyond higher education, though certainly higher education plays a critical role in advancing attainment. But trying to use attainment as a driver for education and workforce alignment, economic development, and quality of life, that thriving component. So it's a signal of overall community and economic health, as well as a way to promote that cross-sector alignment and position education as a tool to drive economic development. Next slide. So to that end, educational attainment requires the comprehensive engagement of stakeholders, not only across post-secondary, so not only your post-secondary institutions, but also the shared engagement of key stakeholders and sectors. And this includes, as illustrated here, employer and business leaders really to articulate future workforce needs, health and human services to braid supports for low-income students, to help them enroll in and complete post-secondary programs, so to lower those costs and provide them the wraparound supports necessary. Certainly elementary and secondary, that K-12 component, to share with the responsibility for preparing younger students. Adult education providers to re-engage adults as the pipeline of younger students is, as we know, in no state sufficiently large enough to dramatically improve statewide attainment. And then certainly labor and economic development partners to ensure that the state attracts educated workers. We also recognize that, with attainment as the North Star, recognize that many of you have started to look at defining value in your state and understanding the credentials that are most likely to lead to valuable outcomes for individuals, and therefore helping individuals access and complete in those programs. So I'll now turn it over to Madeline to talk about the role that completion can play in advancing attainment.
Thanks, Martha. So yeah, as Martha just established, post-secondary education is certainly one of the foundational building blocks for advancing value-centered state attainment goals. And a completion metric definitely plays an important role here and has been something brought up by multiple states as something to consider alongside this attainment goal setting process. So you all work with completion each and every day, but completion really refers to students completing post-secondary credentials during a specific time frame. So it can be measured a few different ways. You can think about a rate. So for example, what percentage of first-time, full-time freshmen graduate in X number of years. But some states are also thinking about kind of a number or a production metric. So we could look at the number of credentials of a certain type that a post-secondary system or institution is producing each year, for example. And completion is really a leading indicator or a benchmark for higher education and post-secondary institutions working towards attainment. So this works alongside other really important indicators like your access, your persistence measures, but completion is a really, really key role here. And it's also a really strong place to apply that value lens in addition to through attainment. So applying a value lens in completion metrics really provides a signal to post-secondary institutions about the types of programs that are leading to economic prosperity, however that's defined in your state. And that can make it a really powerful incentive and accountability tool in higher education that really helps capture the role higher education can play in advancing attainment goals. And also by applying the value lens in completion as well, it really reinforces the state's commitment to aligning education and opportunity. So value-centered completion metrics are definitely a piece of the post-secondary puzzle to advancing attainment. So though completion plays this really critical role, it's not the North Star end goal that we're talking about. So having value-centered attainment goals as the North Star serves several key purposes that I'll walk through here. So the first, having a clear focus on people. Population measures like attainment, they really look at a broad look of who is being served and receiving the benefit from higher education. So it is possible to increase completion by, for example, one person earning multiple credentials. So multiple credentials by the same individual. And though that is very critical and very important for career progression and stacking credentials and building upon higher education, it can inflate progress if we're only looking at that without actually increasing the share of residents in a state that are earning credentials and experiencing the benefit from those credentials. So population-based attainment measures really keeps that focus on people rather than just number of awards and really helps us understand how are we expanding opportunity. Two, cross-sector realities of state ecosystems today. So completion is a really, really useful tool for post-secondary institutions and one that has to be addressed in this conversation. But we know that higher education doesn't operate in a silo in states, and there are other aspects that need to be considered. So broader population-based attainment goals really require workforce, education, and overall community alignment, participation, and contribution. And I would say that those lines across sectors are becoming increasingly blurred right now too. So it's more important now than ever for a state goal to really reflect that cross-sector reality and the importance of improved collaboration. And then lastly, the role of access. So completion is kind of a look at higher education and the role of higher education, but it's only one piece. Completion doesn't tell the full story. Access is another important piece. And though we know that, when Courtney was talking about the path toward 2040, that access is not enough, it is an important piece of the puzzle. And you know that we know that you cannot reach attainment without expanding access. So really having this attainment goal at the state level helps highlight that equally important role of access in this work. So all of these elements kind of discussed really point to a need for clear framing of state value-centered attainment goals, as well as corresponding indicators, whether they're post-secondary, like completion, or otherwise. So for example, labor force participation might be a strong leading indicator when we're looking at workforce sectors. So really just want to highlight kind of 3 points of framing that are hopefully useful tools. So one, just having a clear purpose. Value-centered attainment goals are broad state level goals that extend beyond higher education. Their purpose is to establish a state level shared vision and really root post-secondary as an engine of economic development, economic opportunity. So it's a broader look. And that brings me to my second point. Given that goals really will require far more than just post-secondary education to achieve, stakeholder engagement is key. So bringing together representatives from different sectors is really critical for long-term success because it cannot fall on the onus of solely post-secondary education to achieve a value-centered post-secondary attainment goal. And lastly, just thinking about the role of value. The shift to include value is an intentional and powerful message here. So it's not just about earning credentials for the sake of earning a credential. It's earning a credential that offers a path toward economic opportunity and really is driving prosperity, knowledge economies, and a strong state economy overall. So we hope these framing tools are helpful, as you have these conversations in states. And now I'm going to pass it to Patrick to discuss some of the elements of strong state attainment goals.
Great. Thank you, Madeline. If you want to just go to the next slide. So let me just take a moment to sort of resituate ourselves with this state attainment collaborative and what we're hoping to accomplish. You heard from Courtney and Chris about how Lumina got to goal 2040 and the thinking behind what is value, where are we heading as a nation right now. And the look back that Courtney provided, I think, is really important to note, where we made tremendous progress as a country on the way to goal 2025, from one state with an attainment goal to 49, and moving actual attainment in the US from 38% to 55%. So tremendous progress. And we are at a somewhat different moment right now. I think the data that Courtney shared about the loss of confidence in higher education over the last decade, I think really shapes our context right now and the importance of really focusing on value that individuals and communities can feel. Like, of course, we still know that the data is very compelling, that especially if you're in a bachelor's degree, it is worth your time. There is a high return on investment there, pays off over the course of your career. And yet at the same time, particularly talking to young people who are attending college right now and entering a really uncertain labor market, it doesn't always feel like the value is tangible in the ways that I think they would like and we would like. And we're seeing in states across the country, including some represented on this call, where legislators are starting to look at program outcomes and wanting to really just look at the labor market outcomes of graduates as the criteria for program viability. And I think how states think about this, how they define value, is really central to the work that we're doing together. And we understand that states are in different stages of this process, and that all of you are operating in different state contexts with, competing priorities, various political contexts, of course. But when we brought this state attainment collaborative together, the goal was to bring states who wanted to set value attainment goals together to work on this and to be able to provide some support in your journey towards setting a new state attainment goal. Next slide, Madeline. And so as we've heard from you, I know HCM is meeting with all of you, and we've been in conversation internally and with them. We've put together, I think, the elements of a strong attainment goal. You can think of these as design principles or simply as questions that you need to answer along the way to setting a attainment goal that fits within your state context. And again, these are our recommendations, but I'll walk through each one of these just to add a little more context and information. So first, quantifiable and measurable. It's essential to have a numeric target that you are working towards as a state. And again, 49 states did this with completion. There's Drive to 55 in Tennessee, 40-40-20 in Oregon, 60 by 30 in Texas. All examples of quantifiable attainment goals with the numeric target. So you know what your North Star is and how you're moving towards that. Second, value centered. And as discussed, Lumina has set a 15% wage premium over the average high school graduate as the value metric for Goal 2040, and simultaneously acknowledges that it's an imperfect measure, but it's where we needed to start so that we can measure it across the country. I think one of the things that I'm excited about with the State Attainment Collaborative is how you all are able to find and define value in your state context. Because we know, hearing from you, hearing from other stakeholders and partners, there are programs that may not meet that earning threshold, but are essential to community well-being. Early childhood education always comes to mind, and there are others as well. And so thinking about how you're defining value, not just in terms of economic returns to the individual, but to community as well, I think is an important part of this conversation. Third, defining your population. As Chris walked through, we've broken our goal down into different age bands. 25 to 64 is where we're focused, but thinking about where you want to focus your goal setting, what is the population, either sorted by age that you're focused on? Are there underrepresented populations within your state that you want to focus additional attention on, whether that's underrepresented minorities, low income, rural? What are the priority populations that make sense within your state context? I think that is something that we'll have some additional conversation about in a different webinar, but you need to define population. Time bound, of course, having a clear target. What is the year by which you want to achieve this goal? 2030, 2040, 2050, whatever it is that makes sense for your current context. Ambitious and achievable. Again, I think we're at a moment in higher education where there's a lot of forces pushing on higher education in different ways, and thinking about what you'll need to do within your state in order to reach a goal that is ambitious, yet also achievable, again, is something for you all to think about and grapple with in your context. But we would hope that there's some, I think, recognition that maintaining the status quo is unlikely to enable you to reach a truly ambitious goal. And we know to get to goal 2040, 75% goal, we're currently at about 44% of credentials of value attained in the country. So there's significant distance to travel over the next 15 years. And finally, the goal should be formally set in some way. That can be through statute, through a agency strategic plan, through an executive order, et cetera. But it should be set in a way that it reflects commitment from a wide range of stakeholders, that this goal has sustainability beyond leadership changes, and that it sets an ambitious North Star that it has buy-in from critical stakeholders within your state. Again, recognizing you all are in different places. As Martha and Madeline identified, setting an attainment goal requires a breadth of stakeholders, both from K-12 and workforce, on both sides of higher education, as well as policymakers to really embrace it and to have the political force to move it forward. So with that, I believe I will turn it to Nate Johnson.
Thanks, Patrick. I just want to go over a couple of things about the data sources that you might use in setting goals and defining value, measuring it going forward, without duplicating too much of what both Chris and Patrick went over in their parts of the presentation. So the one source that's probably the easiest for a lot of states to use, either directly or through data sets that have been made available by other organizations, is the American Community Survey. It's a large annual statistically representative survey. I noticed most of the states on this call are in probably the medium-sized state category. And so, whether uh, the number of things that you can do with the American Community Survey depends on a lot on how big the state is, because it's 1% of your population is surveyed every year. So in a small state, that's a 10,000 people a year. In a big state, that might be several hundred thousand or millions of people per year. And so just to kind of calibrate what you might be able to do. Other surveys that are available, the current population survey, which has some things available at the state level, but it's only 50,000 people a month or 60,000 people a month, I think. So it's designed to be representative at the state level for kind of labor force levels, but maybe not for everything that you would want to do. The survey of income and program participation, and then the new survey that Chris mentioned that was used for looking at certificates and certifications, the National Training, Education, and Workforce Survey, which is not primarily designed for state level use, but the methodology document that Chris referenced kind of goes through the ways that you can cross-reference that with other tools and use it at a state level. I just kind of want to throw out there, I'm not aware of states that do this, but states could directly you could ask your population about their employment and credentials. I know not too far away, British Columbia does this, but I'm not aware of a state that does it. So the American Community Survey itself is a survey, and there's nothing that would prevent a state that wants to really kind of dig into this and ask its own population about these issues from doing that yourself. Then there are administrative data sets. You all have, in one form or another, longitudinal systems connecting education and workforce. Many of you also participate in collaborations that allow you to do at least some kind of cross-state matching through the PSEO project. There's also data in the college scorecard that's not primarily intended to be used for us at the state level, but there are ways that you can kind of tinker with that and get some valuable data points out of that for states as well. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of what you're going to be looking at when you're using these data sources, the first one is that kind of measure of attainment and wages, and that's, at least with degree credentials, is pretty straightforward to do with the American Community Survey. You can go in directly for a state, and depending on the state, you can disaggregate to some extent by race, ethnicity, gender, even regions of a state, and get the percentage of people who have a credential and are earning above either state or national high school level wages. There are other ways you could define that wage threshold too, that might be more important to your state and in defining what value means for you. And then I'll just throw out there some of the other non-financial dimensions of value. So the kind of minimum definition of value that that Patrick referenced is recognizing that the economic return is important, but there are other things that you could look at that are additional dimensions of value, including priorities that your state may have in terms of where you're going economically or otherwise, particular programs or occupations that are driving your economic priorities or your state strategic plans. You can look at measures of financial independence, like rates of um, um, SNAP recipients or Medicaid recipients. And you can look at other indicators of well-being, like home ownership or certain kinds of occupations in the American Community Survey that are associated with leadership or even not just being a member of the workforce, but being an employer. So, what kinds of who's in a CEO role or an elected official role or things like that. So those are all things that could be part of your value calculation in addition to the economic return threshold. Can go to the next slide. So this is just kind of bringing it back to the slide that that Patrick went over about what the elements of strong attainment goals are, and I think we're going to have an opportunity to go into the data sources in more detail in a future webinar on that. And I think who is next?
Yeah, I think we'll pass it back to Patrick now. That's just kind of
Okay.
some initial ideas for how we can dial this value-centered element of a strong goal. So Patrick, feel free to kind of reiterate these and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Great. Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Nate, for walking through the some of the variety of data sources available. Again, I don't think I need to rehash these right now, but as we've taken your input, as we've reflected on goal setting within Lumina and partnership with others, I think these are key questions that each state needs to think about and try and answer on the way to setting a strong attainment goal. And I think, Madeline, if you want to go to the next slide, then we will just open it up for discussion. So I don't know if you have a preference. We can take questions in a couple different ways. Folks can drop them in the chat and we can tackle them that way, but feel free to come off mute and just jump in, and we will do our best to answer any questions that you all have.
Hi, Patrick. It's Kate Shaw from Pennsylvania. How are you?
Good. Good to hear from you.
Yeah, for sure. We just last week passed a strategic plan for higher education, which is the first in like over 2 decades. It's really closely aligned with Lumina's agenda and priorities and the need to sort of knit together, access, attainment, and, workforce outcomes that lead to prosperity. But one of the things that's making me nervous as we quickly pivot to implementation is the fact that because we now have a focus on value, that construct is so far outside of the realm of control of higher education that it makes me nervous to think about how we set, fairly static definitions of and metrics of value in the face of things that are rapidly changing in the economy. So I think about AI. I think about the fact that my state has a dramatic influx of data centers that are being built, and I think about sort of the short-term value of credentials that we're being asked to produce for the data centers may not carry long-term value, depending upon sort of what happens in that space. So I wonder if you guys can comment on the issue of flexibility, or just sort of taking into account that what might be valuable right now, even no matter what the definition is, could really change depending upon what's happening in an economy that is, remarkably changeable right now.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a run at that and, welcome my colleagues' input as well. I certainly empathize with the questions and the challenges in Pennsylvania, and particularly the way the economy is changing. And there's so much that we don't know about this. And, reflecting back on comments that Courtney Brown made in the Stronger Nation webinar a couple weeks back, Lumina has not taken a perspective, and I think it's unlikely to take a perspective on which credentials lead to value, because that can change so much depending on regional economies, changes to employer, all of that happening in real time. And so a wide range of certainly bachelor's degrees, but also credentials have durability in the labor market. And I think, how to define value, how to think about value is still kind of an open question. I mean, I wish we had a more definitive answer to that. I think I'm looking at like Chris or Michelle, if either one of you want to jump in with some more background on how Lumina arrived at the 15% threshold. Yeah, Michelle, please jump in.
So I am not the data person, so I'm not going to answer that question, because I might say there are nuances and words matter when it comes to some of those decisions. So I'm going to leave that for Courtney Brown. If you want to know the nitty-gritty details about how we arrived at the 15% threshold, she can get you there. My high level version is we have always, when it came to credentials, had a value metric in Stronger Nation. It was a 10% threshold. So that was already in the data set for quite some time. So when it came down to looking at all degrees and credentials, we came up with 15%. Courtney Brown can tell you more details about that. But in terms of some of the things that you raised, Kate, I certainly appreciate and understand why the need for flexibility is important. Certainly, states are operating in very different contexts. And I think that this is a question and something that we will continue to talk about over the duration of this project, but I don't want to preemptively and too early just move toward complete flexibility and then we lose some coherence. We certainly know that every state will define value in a way that meets their own reality. But what I don't want to do is risk creating 50 different approaches that make it harder to measure progress and share lessons learned and build collective momentum. So the question for me isn't about like, will we just open the doors and say everybody can have flexibility? It's more about how do we balance the flexibility that you will need with shared guardrails that create some common expectations for common insights that will come later on. But this is something that, we've been hearing. We want to be responsive to it. So we'll continue to talk about that from now on. But I just don't want to just say, yes, we will open the floodgates, because I don't want 50 different experiences. We want to have something that ties all of these states together. So welcome your continued input on that. I really would love to continue talking to you about that. How's that feel, Kate? You can tell me the truth.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the fine line you're trying, Michelle. I understand the importance of having some consistency. I just, we enter this conversation at a point in time that is just particularly volatile, and that was nothing that you necessarily could have predicted, but it just speaks to, navigating through setting these attainment goals and attainment, goals of value, of course, with a board that might, I have board members from, workforce, employment, labor. I've got a lot of board members, and everybody's going to have a slightly different feeling about sort of how flexible we should be and not be. So I just think continuing the conversation makes a lot of sense. Like, set the goals and then we'll continue to talk about it.
Yeah, and just know my door is always open for that conversation. And I know Courtney and Chris would feel the exact same way. So don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Thank you.
And I see the question in the chat from Tina. I might direct this one to you, Chris. So asking if we can please clarify if 15% metric and credentials of value requirements were applied to bachelor's degrees as well. I know, Chris, I pinged you about this very question just last week. So would love your response to this.
Yeah, thanks, Tina. It's good to see you, and thank you for the question. And I'll pick up a lot of what Michelle said is, when we added certificates and certifications to Stronger Nation, because we didn't know as much about them, we put a wage threshold on them to start. And so what this goal really does is move that wage threshold to bachelor's degrees. We set a 15% wage premium over national median high school earnings. In part because when we looked at the numbers, did we do 15% for one, 18% for another, 20% for another? The differences weren't that much. And for just ease of communication, it seems to make sense that the 15% works. And so again, the 15% is, this is not administrative data. This is sample survey data, right? We use the ACS or N2s or other surveys that say at this point in time, in 2024, for everybody who had an associate degree in the workforce, what percent made at least 15% more than what that data set said the median for the high school graduate was, right? And so these are year by year, credential by credential analyses to help us understand the condition and the lived experiences of the people in your states and in the nation that are earning at least 15% more. We know for some degrees, like bachelor's and master's in particular, they earn way more than that. And that's what that education types tab is on Stronger Nation. It allows you to really understand what percent of people with each of those credentials in your state are earning way more or more than the 15%, if not way more. We are exploring doing some kind of fancy figure in the future. But that's the 15% metric. I'm going to pause, see if I answered your question. And if not, I'll provide more detail, but I'm going to stop there.
So I guess what I'm asking is, say we have this credential attainment goal, and if the 15% is applied to bachelor's. So if we have some bachelor's degrees that aren't making that cut in terms of their ROI, that won't count towards our completion and success then? Just because, we're hearing more and more and more about degrees that aren't making that. While in general they do. Just today I read an Inside Higher Ed article about Indiana proposing legislation to no longer allow programs to be offered that aren't making that earnings threshold. So I'm just curious, if we have a degree that doesn't make it, then that will not count towards our success metric.
It will not in that year. Remember, this is where things are slightly different. We're not following cohorts right after they graduate for a couple of years. The way that we think about it is your entire state's population aged 25 to 64. So in your example, Tina, you might have somebody who has a bachelor's degree in art education. That's what I had, right? And I will say in my first year of teaching, I made $24,000 because that was the step schedule in the state, whatever, right? Now, me at 32 met the threshold. Me at 25 didn't, right? So it's not that degree, the bachelor's degree, isn't something for the way that we measure it. And again, I'm not commenting on states and their policies, right? But the way that we measure it is at a point in time. For somebody who has a credential, are they making that 15% or more? The thing we do understand is earnings change for individuals over time, hopefully, and hopefully the arc is up, right? But we're not following people over time. Does that answer your question?
So
Or
let me take a stab at a piece of this because Tina, this was a question that we debated among the executive team at Lumina as well. And I wish Courtney was here. She had to hop off for another meeting. But from what I recall, it is 15% above the in earnings of a high school diploma in the same field. So I was concerned, as most people use the example here, early childhood, teachers, social workers, occupations that have high social value but might have low earning value, but it'd be hard to live without these jobs. Even with those occupations, when you apply that 15% threshold above a high school diploma, they still had higher earnings above the high school diploma. Um, I can set up a call with you and Courtney to talk through it more, but to see what majors you might be most concerned about within the context of your particular state. But I know through some of our early back and forths about this, she was able to show me the data that revealed that is not, you know, a social worker compared an an electrician or a scientist, a biologist. It is a social worker compared to someone who's doing a comparable job in that field who only had a high school diploma versus whatever credential we are looking at the value threshold for.
Okay, that's the first time I've heard it explained that way. So, and I can follow up with Madeline too. She does an excellent job on our calls, and we get in the weeds all the time. I'm a get in the weeds person, even though I'm not a data person. That's probably why I have so many questions. So,
Okay, yeah, and I know there's a little nuance between what Chris offered and what I offered. Courtney can help clarify it for all of us. We'd be happy to talk to you more.
thank y'all.
Other questions that folks want to discuss or ask of the panel of experts and knowledgeable individuals that we've assembled? Yes, Barbara.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Barbara Schmertz from Maryland Higher Education Commission. I'm wondering, and forgive me if this is not if this is for a future discussion, but can any of you speak to how Lumina, there's things been raised about sort of this space we sit between Lumina's goal, which they are promoting both nationally and taking on the charge of helping states set a vision. I will speak only personally for me. As I prepared our goal report every year to report out to our legislature, I relied more and more heavily on Lumina's framework and argument as to the value and so forth. I borrowed more and more of the materials from your website, probably every year. And we are in the midst of preparing our new state plan, and I am hitching our wagon completely to the attainment goal that you've put forward. What could we expect from Lumina to try to have states tell their story? So we've heard from Pennsylvania and other states the challenge we will have to marry a goal that so again, full disclosure, I'm not trying to come up with a different goal. I just want to hitch onto the 2040 and help move Maryland forward. But what could we expect of products from you guys to just try to tell that story, right? So in my mind, a bad way for a state to go is to shrink their denominator. We don't want that. That's not how we want to get to the goal by losing a bunch of people who are in our state. So we want to grow our state population and we want to raise wages. But as been pointed out, and to Chris's point about the methodology, we want to capture these period people over time. And so not only might we see an improvement in wages, but we might see that for everybody, but we also might see that there's just more earnings potential for certain age bands. So what have you guys talked about? Are you going to kind of roll out in addition to the annual updates for the Stronger Nation that we could either hear about or learn about in advance or maybe ask for? I don't even know if that's a fair ask. just because I would like to be a voice for luminous work. So I don't know if, and again, if it's not appropriate for this forum and it's for a future workshop, I'm happy to wait for that.
No, that's a great question, Barbara. I will give part of an answer, and then I will look to my colleagues to add additional context to that. So, when we pulled this State of Attainment Collaborative together, I think one of the things that we understood going into it is that how you tell the story, how you make the case for the goal for higher education in your state is a critical part of this work. And again, recognizing that like every state is in a different context and different place when it comes to trying to set a goal, kind of regardless of where you are, more tools to better advocate for higher education are always useful. And so the way that we approached that with the in-person meeting we had in October was to bring in an expert from Vox. And yeah, we had a communications expert who was able to talk about some of the ways to tell the story of higher education and to like advocate for it. We do plan on having a future webinar focused on that. I understand that your question is somewhat different than that. Like I hear you asking for like specific tools, data tools in particular, I think that could be utilized to strengthen the story and case making. And that's where I will pause and first turn to Michelle, who has unmuted, and then anybody else who wants to add on to that as well.
Yeah, Barbara, it's such a timely question, so thank you for asking it. I think my question is a bad way to answer a question with a question, but I am compelled to do so right now because my question for you and anyone else is, what do you need? So, we're still in the early stages of gearing up and doing things. We have webinars that we will be having, hosting throughout the year. We have the one-on-one conversations that you already have been having with HCM, sometimes also with the Lumina team. Later this year, we'll have a state policy retreat, which you all will be invited to. So, we're trying to ensure that there are constant touch points with the smaller team, the bigger team, everyone in the field. But Patrick also talked about the comms firm. But what would you like? It is early enough in the process that we can customize this to be most useful to you all. And I don't want to sit where I sit and presume that I know what you really need. And I think I can speak for the Lumina team and the HCM team on that front as well. So just know that if there's ever something that any of you, not just Barbara, anybody feels like, you know what, I really, really need this, and I wish Lumina could provide it, that's information we want to have. And we can sort of build it into the repertoire beyond the other things that I just listed.
Super helpful. I do not have an answer directly to that, but I am leading the first of 4 meetings literally tomorrow morning, 11 o'clock, with our attainment and production goal work group. And whereas I might plan on just moving across the Lumina model without question, my workmates that are coming from campuses and chambers of commerce, etc., may ask some questions that will help answer that. So good to know that giving you those ideas at any time may work, but that sooner rather than later could help you figure out whether it's doable on a timeline.
Yeah, and you're among the first who are going down this path. So whatever you learn, I think will help everybody else. So feel free to just shoot us a text message or email tomorrow
Great.
After your meeting and just let us know how it went and what
Okay.
you might need.
Will do. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. And just to underscore that point, please reach out because again, if you're having these questions, if the folks from, the chamber and the campuses in Maryland are, trying to poke holes or want things framed a different way to, help make the case to, their boards, their constituents, that's happening in another state too. And so one of the main purposes of bringing together collaboratives like this is to share information across states. And we are happy to be responsive to what you need and then also figure out ways where we can share those solutions back out to the larger group, and then hear their questions and circulate those answers as well. So thank you for raising this.
And for the sake of just adding on to all the kudos that my colleagues have shared, I think that's the beauty of this collaborative. And so the hope is that, we get to hear more of these stories that I did not know you were using material previously directly from our site to build your case. And that's really helpful for us to know. And I think it's perhaps helpful for others on this call to know, as Patrick mentioned. So if you all have instances or stories like that you can share with us, that really enhances this collaborative and what we're hoping to do this round of goal setting.
Other questions that folks want to raise at this point? Okay, Greg, do you have a question, or are you just clearing your throat? Okay, I'll take that as not a question.
Clear my throat, sorry.
All good. Great. Well, we really appreciate you all making time today for this conversation. This has been recorded, so we do anticipate putting this up on the internal facing website that you'll have access to just as a resource for your colleagues who weren't able to join the call today. And the invitation to share and also to ask questions or say, hey, this thing would be really useful. Is that something that Lumina has or can help provide? That extends not just to Barbara, but to everybody. So you can reach out directly to Courtney Francis or to me, or you can reach out to HCM. I know each one of you have a HCM partner working with your state, but either way, we want to be as responsive to your needs as we possibly can be. And so please reach out. And in that spirit as well, we organized this webinar today to try and add clarity to the questions around, how to set goals, what should we be thinking about, that we're starting to bubble up through your conversations with HCM. And so this is the first of a series of webinars that we will have over the course of the next several months. March 19th is the next webinar. That will be a deep dive into strategic support for priority populations. We'll also be working to do another deep dive on data analysis. As mentioned, strategic communications and comm strategy is one that we anticipate having as well. And, as we mentioned, hopefully we mentioned at our October meeting when we were in person in Indianapolis, I think the next touch point where we'll have the opportunity to be together in person will be at the state policy retreat. We hope to be sending out a save the date for that here before too long. And so look forward to seeing folks online and then again in person in the fall. So with that, unless there are other questions, comments, closing thoughts, I'll thank everybody for your time and we will wrap up today.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.